Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'd like to thank you for coming out tonight for the third part of our talks tonight, specifically race and bias in the criminal justice system, specifically the court system. We've got an excellent panel seated tonight. I was extremely excited to be out here. Jeff Kreidoff was unable to be here tonight. He sends his apologies. My name's Dan Bentley. I am the operations commander for the police department, and I've been here for 24 years and loved every minute of it. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel, starting from my left, going to the right. The first one is David Fornshell, the Warren County prosecutor. David Fornshell was sworn in as the 38th prosecuting attorney of Warren County on February 17th, 2011. David serves as a member of the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, Ohio Prosecuting Attorneys Association Executive Committee, the Warren County Drug Task Force Policy Board, Child Advocacy Center of Warren County Steering Committee, and various other boards and committees. Since becoming the Warren County prosecutor, David has expanded the prosecutor's office's community outreach efforts. Most recently, David developed and conducted training for board members, officers, and volunteers of charitable, church, booster, youth sports, and other not-for-profit organizations on how to protect against internal organizational theft. He has also developed and conducted age-appropriate presentations for numerous Warren County high school, junior high school, and middle school students on topics such as school threats, sexting, date rape, and juvenile decision-making. David has also trained other county prosecutors from around the state of Ohio on topics ranging from the handling of death penalty cases to Ohio's grand jury process and procedures. David received the 2018 Prosecutor of the Year Award for the state of Ohio by the Ohio Prosecuting Attorneys Association and has prosecuted cases receiving international and national attention, including cases profiled by the BBC documentary series Life and Death Row, Good Morning America, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, The New York Times, the UK Daily Mail, and numerous other international and national publications. A seventh-generation Warren County resident, David grew up in the Lebanon Turtle Creek Township area, where he graduated from Lebanon High School. David graduated summa cum laude from Ohio University, where he received degrees in finance and business pre-law. David received his Juris Doctor from Pepperdine University School of Law in Malibu, California, finishing in the top 10% of his graduating class. Seated next to David is the Honorable E. Gerald Parker Jr. Judge Gerald Parker was elected to the Common Pleas Court Bench, General Division, in November of 2018 for the Montgomery County Common Pleas Court, taking office early in January of 2019. Judge Parker is the first African-American male elected to the Montgomery County Court of Common Pleas General Division. He serves on the Offender Supervision and Security Committee. Judge Parker received his BA from Georgetown College, Kentucky, and in 2004, his JD from Salmon P. Chase College of Law at Northern Kentucky University. From 2007 to 2011, Judge Parker was an assistant Montgomery County prosecuting attorney, spending a majority of his time on felony dockets. In 2012, Judge Parker joined the civil litigation team with the Dayton firm of Dyer, Garofalo, Mann & Schultz. He would then be appointed as juvenile magistrate for Montgomery County Juvenile Court in July of 2016. Judge Parker is a member of the Dayton and Ohio State Bar Association, the Ohio Common Pleas Judges Association. He serves on the Judicial Advisory Board of the Monday Community Correctional Institution, as well as a board member for Building Bridges Incorporated, Dayton Mediation Council, and the Salvation Army. Judge Parker's a member of numerous community organizations and received both Dayton's Top 10 African American Male Award and WHIO Channel 7's Making a Difference Award. Seated next to Judge Parker would be the Honorable Jeff Kirby. Judge Kirby has a lifelong connection with Springboro. As a youngster, he played all the sports on every field and court in town. Later, while in college and law school, he was a sports writer and columnist for the Springboro newspaper. After law school, he had a law practice in Springboro with his father and younger brother, all while serving as magistrate in the Springboro court. He is now one of the judges in the Warren County Common Pleas Court, serving in the Domestic Relations Division. Seated next to Judge Kirby is the Springboro magistrate, Kent DePorter. Kent has been an attorney for almost 30 years. He has a private practice and has been the magistrate in Springboro Mayor's Court for the last 4.5 years. As magistrate, he hears misdemeanor cases which carry a maximum fine of $1,000 and a maximum jail sentence of 180 days. The majority of the cases he hears in the Mayor's Court are traffic offenses. Seated next to Kent is Springboro prosecuting attorney Mark Webb. Mark is an attorney practicing in all areas of general litigation, but specializing in family law and criminal defense. In addition to his private practice of Smith, Meyer, and Webb in Springboro, Ohio, Mark serves as the prosecutor in Springboro, Waynesville, and Harveysburg Mayor's Courts. He currently sits as the acting magistrate in Monroe Mayor's Court. Mark has worked in private practice since 2009 after clerking for Judge Oliver in Warren County and the Montgomery County Support Enforcement Agency. Additionally, Mark is certified guardian ad litem and also works with the Greater Dayton and Cincinnati Volunteer Lawyers Projects. Please let's give them a round of applause for taking the time to be with us tonight. Now to begin our discussion, I would like to start with each member of the panel, beginning with David, to talk about your specific role in the criminal justice system.
So as the elected county prosecutor, our office is responsible for prosecuting all felony cases that occur in Warren County, as well as any accompanying misdemeanor cases. We're also responsible for prosecuting any juvenile case that occurs in the county. With respect to misdemeanor cases, you're going to hear some of the discussion from some of the others, I'm sure, about misdemeanor cases. Typically, those are handled by the lower courts. Either you have a mayor's court, Springboro Mayor's Court, or you have Warren County Court. We do have some responsibility for prosecuting misdemeanor cases that occur in certain areas in Warren County, Springboro and Clear Creek Township actually being one of them. But there are 4 other lower courts, essentially, that handle misdemeanor violations that occur in the county. Our office does not prosecute those violations in those particular jurisdictions.
Well, good evening. I want to thank first the Springboro community for allowing all of us to be here. I pretty much hear the cases that Prosecutor Fornshell just mentioned. Those cases come before me, except I'm in Montgomery County. So Montgomery County Common Pleas Court, there are 11 of us Common Pleas Court judges. We specifically hear all felony level cases, F1s to F5. So your F1s are your higher, more violent cases down to your low level felony offenses. And then your high dollar civil litigations, typically anything over $15,000. So.
As was indicated earlier, Jeff Kirby. Officer Bentley, the question was, what is my role in the criminal justice system? So I have to say I do not have a role in the criminal justice system. I'm the domestic relations judge here in Warren County. So I deal with good people who are going through the most, other than losing a child, probably the most difficult thing they're ever going to go through in life. And so it is not some simple mathematical division of assets or time with children. It can often feel like radical surgery without an anesthetic. And so for them, it hurts like the dickens. And so I often will tell them that I recognize that, and that if they go through the range of emotions from anger, frustration, worry, anxiety, all these different range of emotions, that would make them perfectly normal. But then I also tell them, especially if this is the case where there's children involved, if this process is difficult for them at their ages, imagine being 9 and 7. And so I understand, I want to hear what the problems are, but I want to really see how you're going to be part of the solution here. So I want to see, how do you rise above what the problems are to commit yourself to being part of the solution here? And so I want you to bring the best of yourselves for the betterment of your children, because they will get through mom and dad being divorced. They may not like it. In their world, they would like to have the white picket fence and the perfect house and mom and dad down the hall and live happily ever after. If that doesn't happen, they'll get past that. But the hole that will be left with them that will last a lifetime is the degradation that happens to their other parent, particularly if they're the one who is doing that. That's not fair to them. And in my courtroom, I've got a lot of local photographs, all with American flags on it. I have one particular sign that talks about the last part of the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. But the other sign, it just says, in the best interest of the children. And I get to point to that quite a bit. And I say, look, there's nothing in the law that says I have to do what's in the best of a particular parent. I need to do what's in the best interest of the children. I want to see how you're doing that as well. And though I don't like the fact that divorce exists, I love the work that I do, and I'm proud of the work that I do. And I look forward to trying to make a difference and make something better for children. Thank you.
My name is Kent D. Porter, and I'm the magistrate in Springboro Mayor's Court. Unlike Prosecutor Fornshell or Judge Parker, most people that we deal with in Mayor's Court are very wonderful people that have made a minor mistake traffic-wise, driving under suspension, doing something that is a bump in the road, not no guns involved, no robberies, nothing like that. So we get to deal with really good people to come through the court. And our position is that we try to get people straightened out. Sometimes people think that they can go 45 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, and we have to correct them. And if they do that over and over, we have to correct them a little bit harsher than we do the first time. But or if we have a driving under suspension, try to tell them what they need to do to get valid so that they are comfortable driving in all cities. But it's a very nice court, and we deal with very nice people. And again, I think Judge Parker and Prosecutor Fornshell deal with people that have more serious things and a more difficult job than what we have.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you all for coming, and I want to say to my fellow panelists, I'm honored to be up here with you all. Thanks, Lieutenant Bentley, for having us today and moderating for us. My name is Mark Webb, and you may have heard by Lieutenant Bentley's entry that I get to wear a number of different hats. I don't know if it's telling that I'm the farthest away from the prosecutor and the defense attorney, but I am. That's what I do about 4 days of the week. My private practice is about 200 yards that way on 741. And other than that, I'm very blessed and lucky to be the Springboro prosecutor. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with the police department. I'm the prosecutor in Kent's court, where he's the magistrate. He's right, we deal with misdemeanor traffic offenses. Probably the highest level of offense you would think of in our court is perhaps a misdemeanor assault, and operating a vehicle under the influence, and that would be one of my roles in the criminal justice system. So, in addition to that, my private practice, I do the same thing in Waynesville and the bustling metropolis that is Harveysburg, if any of you have ever driven through there. I've also recently been lucky enough to sit on the bench in Monroe Mayor's Court, and so I'm really pleased to be here with you guys and talk about this from all different angles, whether it be a defense attorney, whether it be a prosecutor, or whether it happens to be a magistrate. So thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you to everyone. As I mentioned, we've got an excellent panel assembled here with a wealth of experience as we move on. And I want to get everybody's input on this question as well. We'll do something different. We'll start at the other end and come back this way. And then with Mr. Fornshell, we'll start with Mr. Webb. The question is, why do you personally think there's a feeling in our society that the criminal justice system is systemically racist?
Well, I think part of that starts with us recognizing historically what our country has been through. By my math, it's been less than 170 years since 1865. And since then, this is the legal historian in me, but we've dealt with United States Supreme Court cases that have said African Americans can't be sued because they're not citizens, separate but equal in Plessy versus Ferguson. Of course, those have all been overturned, but it's not too long ago. It was 1954 that Brown versus Board of Education came in front of the United States Supreme Court that said, no, that's not right. So I think when we talk about institutional or systemic racism, you have to start with recognition that this is something our country has been through. Now, to put that in more present day analysis, if you've watched the news, 60 Minutes, you've seen the numbers on crack cocaine convictions, crack cocaine sentences, moving forward to prison populations, and of course the media today, any chance they get, wants to talk about police brutality or law enforcement, things like that. So it starts with a recognition, I think, and I think that's where a number of people, and judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys alike, can recognize that there is an issue. And it's these kinds of discussions that help us address those issues. The hardest question is what to do about it. I represented a young man, and the judge was wonderful. He was a Warren County judge, but he was a young black male. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago, so it's before the topic has really come back to the forefront. But he was defeated. He was defeated before he walked in front of that judge. And yes, he was guilty. A lot of things I do as a criminal defense attorney is representing guilty people, trying to figure out how can we make you better? How can we fix this? How can we address the issue? And it wasn't until he walked in front of that judge and that judge listened, that judge cared, that judge wanted to fix his addiction problem and wanted to hear him out. Afterwards, he felt vindicated is the wrong word, but he felt heard. And so to answer your question, Dan, I guess the first step is recognizing our history, recognizing, in my opinion, that the issue exists in every facet that we deal with in our life, including the judicial system, and thinking about how can we do this better? How can we treat a person individually, address their problems, and help them? And I think that's what lawyers are out to do. Prosecutors and defense attorneys aren't at each other's throats at all times. They're looking for justice. They have obligations to the court. When I'm trying a divorce case in front of Judge Kirby, the best interest of the children is what I have at issue and what I think the other attorney does too in our bar. So in my opinion, the summary would be recognition and having these types of discussions about how we can do this better.
I would agree with Mark that we've had a long history in the United States that is not favorable to this topic. I also believe that the perception is reality a lot of times. So we hear something or we see something and we think that's what it is everywhere. I think the way to overcome that is if you come to Mayor's Court in Springboro and you see how we treat people and how the system works. If you go to Judge Parker or Judge Kirby's courtroom and you see how people are treated, and there's no longer that perception that people are treated differently because of race. I would also say that economics has a large thing to do with the disparity of treatment. There is an issue with some people can buy a Chevy Chevette and some people can buy a Lamborghini. Well, the Lamborghini is probably going to outperform the Chevy Chevette. So to say that we have court-appointed counsel and we have top defense attorneys is a reality. So sometimes people aren't going to get the best defense. But I think that if more people came into courtrooms and saw how everybody was treated, I think that's a way to overcome some of this, and it's going to take time. I think that the police departments are very much aware of the perception, and they are taking steps to make sure, and I know Springboro is taking extra steps that make sure that people are treated all across the board the same. And so the most cases that Mark and I get in Springboro Mayor's Court probably is driving under suspension, which to me is a money issue. The court of Ohio, or the legislature in Ohio has a lot of reasons why you can be suspended, and all of them require that you pay reinstatement fees. And if you're working full-time and you have 2 kids and you're not making very much money, it's very difficult to put that money towards your license suspension or to get a reinstatement fee paid. And most of the time, that is poorer sections of our community that have difficulty getting a valid license. It's easy to tell them, and we do all the time at every court session, go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, here's a phone number, here's what you need to do to get valid. But the reality is, if they don't have the extra money to pay, they can't get it. But I think our society, at least this panel and the places that I've practiced in, have realized that there has been an issue, and I think that they are constantly working towards making sure that that issue is addressed and that we move forward in a positive manner.
The question is, why is there that perception? And in my 22 years of being the magistrate in the Springboro Court before Magistrate DePorter, I would often, you just try to imagine yourself being a white guy from Springboro, Ohio. What if I were to find myself in a courtroom in a different country where everybody spoke a different language and everybody looked a little different than I did? It would only be natural that you would wonder, am I going to be given a fair shake here? And we all know through history that just a lot of unfortunate things have happened through the years, and those stories get spread, and that feeling grows. And I do hope and I do believe that there will be a day that it can go away, but it doesn't go away overnight. And we're not there yet. So that's why I think there's still that perception.
So there's a list of 3 things that kind of were touched on, but I kind of want to get a little bit deeper. The first reason why many people have this skepticism and mistrust, particularly when it comes to the criminal justice system. The first reason, let's look at the numbers. African Americans, black folks makes up 13% of the population in this country, yet are about 1/3 of the prison population. All right, that's just the number. Whites make up 64% approximately, and still make up less, about 30% of the prison population. So just looking at those numbers, something is not right. I can tell you, being African American male and having been a young African American male, I still think I'm young, but I'm not anymore. But I didn't grow up with a criminogenic behavior. I did not grow up with around African Americans and black people with growing up just in a pathway that we were just destined to go to prison. So the numbers are right there. The second reason was touched on by Mr. Babb is history. I mean, not just, we tend to look at slavery and then we look at the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King, and after that, I think everything should be okay, right? Well, if you take a look deeper from slavery and then moving towards Jim Crow laws, states sanctioning segregation, separate but equal, that was touched upon, Brown versus Board of Education, but that which came about later, civil rights movement. But then let's keep going. Loving versus Virginia, miscegenation laws finally being eradicated. Let's keep going. The same amount of crack cocaine versus the same amount of powder cocaine, sentences being completely different. Who uses crack cocaine predominantly? Black people. Who uses powder cocaine? White people. Let's go a little bit further. Heroin epidemic has just completely, it's been devastating for our communities for some time, and it's been dealt with in a completely different manner than the way crack cocaine was dealt with in the 70s and 80s. In the 70s and 80s, it was tough on crime, tough on crime, tough on crime. But what we're doing today now is trying to be right on crime. And that has shifted over a time period. Thankfully, the heroin epidemic came along, used by a different demographic, and now we're moving towards treatment courts and specialty courts, which is fantastic, which is something that we should be doing to assist these individuals who are struggling with these nonviolent offenses. But that has not always been the case. So we're learning, we're moving, we're progressing, but you can't help but take a look at these dynamics and see, well, when there's issues today between police and how the court system has been treating those of color, and not see the correlation. And the last reason, I'm not one to say it's media's fault. I will say the platforms are different. People are louder now. Imagine Rosa Parks with a Twitter account and how much faster the civil rights would have progressed, you know? So, those are the three reasons, not exhaustive, that have caused many individuals to think differently, more curious as to whether or not we are doing things the best that we can in the criminal justice system. But I can assure you, I know that things have changed for the better, but we're still a long ways away.
I think I would kind of tackle this question a little bit differently, just in terms of what we're talking about when we hear the term systemic racism, because I hear that used a lot when I try to stay up to date on literature and current events and policy, what policymakers are doing on this topic, and I hear the term systemic racism. And sometimes I have to sit back and ask myself, what does that term even mean in and of itself? And I guess from my perspective, when I hear the term systemic racism, it's an implication that the justice system itself, the policies and the procedures of the justice system itself is currently racist, meaning they are skewed for a specific outcome, different for one particular demographic group versus another. And I've been prosecutor for 10 years, and so I have fortunately, I think, been on the kind of the progress side of what has historically happened, and I don't disagree at all with why there is some historical, not some, why there's justifiably historical distrust between certainly the African American community and the justice system. But I will say that I agree with some of my fellow panel members that as we look at things today, I've not seen situations where processes or procedures in the court themselves are inherently racist. But I do think that there are things that happen that disproportionately affect certain segments of the population. And so when you see certain segments of the population being affected at a greater percentage than others, then that is going to fuel into what has historically been these issues, and people are going to, based on that, make a determination that, see, it's not any better now. We're still seeing X number of percentage of African Americans incarcerated versus white individuals incarcerated. Somebody brought up the issue of the license suspensions and things like that. I think from my perspective, one of the things that we have seen happen in the criminal justice system is significant residual effects, not necessarily of the statutes themselves, but what the punishments are that are levied in relation to that. And so if you have African Americans at greater levels of poverty than people that are white, and we are suspending licenses and you have to pay reinstatement fees, and if you don't pay a reinstatement fee, you're essentially driving without a license, you end up in this kind of this vicious circle of license suspension, driving without a license, going to jail for a couple of days, coming back, your reinstatement fees and your fines getting to be greater and greater. And so you end up seeing a lot of residual things. It's not that there's anything inherently racist about a statute that says you can't drive without a license or that you have to pay a reinstatement fee if you, do get your license suspended. But I think from a practical effect, some of the burden on those residual consequences fall disproportionately on certain parts of the population, which just fuels to a lot of this perception. So I think I would caution somewhat against lumping everything that's a disproportionate effect on a population as meaning that the system itself and the procedures themselves are inherently racist. I think the residual effects can have disproportionate effects, and that's where you probably, in today's age, I think a lot of our time and energy and effort is on focusing on some of those residual effects and how it disproportionately affects certain people and certain demographics in our population.
Thank you all. Judge Parker, you touched on something I was curious about and I was going to bring up, the difference between crack cocaine and powder cocaine and the demographics that use those individual drugs. I was wondering if you could maybe speak a little bit about mandatory minimum sentencing, if you find that ties your hands sometimes, and the difference in those two.
Well, Prosecutor Attorney Fornshell did mention, there's equality and there's equity. Equality deals with treating everyone the same and trying to make sure that everyone is treated equally. Equity does focus on outcomes. When you talk about mandatory sentencing, when you see a young African-American male, 22 years old, and you're potentially having to sentence him to 2 years, starting at 2 years up for an F2 felony amount, the impact that has on that young male. But I can also tell you, having been worked in juvenile court as a magistrate, I have prosecuted the parents of individuals and have seen their sons or their daughters coming through the juvenile system and seeing the school to prison pipeline. So the effect of that throughout generationally has been devastating. And like, as I mentioned during the crack epidemic, how much that devastated an entire generation of individuals, and reading through multiple pre-sentence investigations and seeing the background of all the individuals. I mean, let's just be honest. I don't see many UD grads. I don't see many Ohio State grads. I don't see many institutional graduates coming before my court. I do see, unfortunately, those who are uneducated from under-resourced, underserved, and undereducated communities. So it has an impact. I would caution those who will say, when it comes to certain crimes, well, look at Chicago. I mean, look at Chicago. What's going on in Chicago? The problem is there's a Chicago all over the United States. We see communities that are underserved, under-resourced, and undereducated. We should not be surprised when there's difficulties within the justice system. And then it's up to us, as Prosecutor Fornshell said, to eradicate those differences when they come through the court system to make sure that the playing game is fair. But specifically to your question, the mandatory minimum sentence and the ability for many legislatures to kind of tie our hands is obviously going to have an impact for different demographics.
Thank you for that answer. Moving on to Mr. Fornshell, I do want to touch on something. There's this thought in our society that an officer can lie with impunity, without ramification. Can you talk a little bit about Brady issues, what those are, and the consequences for those?
So Brady it's a Supreme Court case. It's several decades old, but it relates to a prosecutor or the state's obligation to provide exculpatory information to a defendant or their counsel at any point that the information we become aware of that information. So anything that goes to not only whether or not the defendant committed the crime or not, if we have evidence that tends to prove that a defendant did not commit a crime, contrary to what many people may believe, we're not allowed to just hide that and not let them know that. We have an ethical obligation. We lose our law license, actually, if we don't provide that information. But we have an obligation to produce that information as quickly as we can to defense counsel. Now, Brady goes beyond just exculpatory information that relates to a specific defendant's case, but it also relates to information that goes to the credibility of anybody that may be a witness in that proceeding, including the law enforcement officers who are responsible for investigating that. So one of the things I'm very proud of with respect to our office is I would venture to say that we have probably the most robust Brady policy that probably exists in the state of Ohio. We regularly reach out to all our law enforcement agencies to determine whether at any point in time any law enforcement officers who work for those agencies, and it's not just law enforcement agencies, we do it with respect to our labs, our crime labs, to make sure that if we have a lab technician that has done anything improper or not even necessarily maliciously done it, but has been sloppy and has been disciplined for something along those lines, that information is provided to our office. And so at least once a year, we inquire of every law enforcement agency, every lab, every prison that has corrections officers. We have 2 prisons in our county in addition to the county jail. So we reach out to those agencies to determine whether there is any officer or employee that's a part of that agency that has been disciplined for anything that would go to their credibility as a witness. And then if that person, obviously if it's egregious enough, you would hope that law enforcement officer would no longer be in law enforcement. That certainly would be all of our preference. But there are times when people make mistakes, but nonetheless they receive their discipline, but nonetheless are allowed to continue to work in the criminal justice field. And with respect to those incidents, we track that information, and to the extent that officer becomes involved in a case, and it's they're going to be a witness in that case. If it's a situation where they have been disciplined because they haven't been completely forthright with respect to a matter, then that information is provided to defense counsel so that defense counsel can judge whether or not that's something they want to use for cross-examination. It goes beyond honesty too. If we have somebody that has mishandled evidence, if we have an officer that has mishandled evidence in a proceeding, then in any case that we have where that officer handles evidence, then we provide to defense counsel the history, the disciplinary history of that officer, demonstrating that, yes, in the past, this officer was disciplined for not properly handling evidence. And so that ends up being fair game that they can use to impeach that witness at trial. Use of force, excessive use of force. That's another big one that we maintain Brady information on, so that if we have a situation where an officer has been disciplined for excessive use of force or prosecuted, hopefully if they've been prosecuted for it, they're probably no longer a police officer. But nonetheless, if they have been disciplined for an excessive use of force, in any case in the future where that officer uses force and there's an issue as to whether or not you have a resisting arrest or whether it was a situation where the officer shouldn't have been using that amount of force, that information is required to be provided to defense counsel or their attorney so that they can make those kind of determinations. And it's something that we take very seriously because as prosecutors, our job first and foremost is to do justice. And so we have to look at this from the standpoint of a defendant, obviously, because it's information that goes to either the credibility of the witnesses or whether it's exculpatory information in the case. But it's also a burden that we carry for law enforcement officers too, because it's frankly a little bit of a scarlet letter, if you will, for that law enforcement officer, because you are essentially, really for perhaps the rest of that law enforcement officer's career, if they make a mistake year 3 or 4 of their career, that's a mistake that will follow you really for the rest of your career. So it's those types of Brady determinations are difficult determinations that our office has to make. It is our responsibility as prosecutors to make those, but we recognize that we have to be somewhat fair and understanding of everybody in that process and determine whether this is something that obviously is needing to be provided to defense counsel.
Thank you. And then I will follow up a little with Judge Kirby. When you were the Springboro magistrate and you were hearing these cases, what would have been the outcome if after you conducted a trial, you learned that the officer had lied during that trial?
Well, obviously, whoever was charged with whatever they were charged with would be found not guilty. I can't imagine a scenario where that would actually happen. I think the gist of the question was the perception, can a police officer just come into court and just lie and get away with it? And the answer is obviously no, because as an elected judge, if you have a reputation for allowing that, you're not going to get reelected. As the magistrate in John Agenbrode's mayor's court, if I did that consistently, he's going to hear about that. And if he hears enough of that, I'm going to hear about that, and I'm not going to have a job anymore. So there's accountability there. So there would never, ever be a situation, I think, where a judge or a magistrate for any length of time could get away with allowing a police officer just to say the sky is purple and allowing that to go through. There's accountability at every turn.
I think that when we're talking about this, we have court-appointed counsel now, and that's great. And so if there is a charge that carries jail time, it's important that everybody has a right to counsel. And that came about over time. I also think that we have to have a system in place, especially for misdemeanor court, to help out the people that don't have the money, especially DUSs, because in all courts, these are just unbelievable. The number of cases. Now, Mark and I have had cases where people have had 45 driving under suspension, so I don't know that I really care about those people as much as I care about the person that gets their first or second and continues to drive because they have a job and have to support their family. But those are cases where there should be a fund in place or something that would allow them not to have to pay or pay overtime a reinstatement fee and still be able to drive. And to some extent, we've done that, but not to the level that we could. And again, the mayor's court we're dealing with really good people most of the time, and there's not a lot of bad actors, but they need help. And mayor's court in Springboro is unique because it's a nice community. You have mayor's courts that Mark serves at and I serve at that are not as wealthy of communities, so the people that come in don't have as much money, and they struggle more with getting their license suspensions taken care of. But Mark does a great job of making sure that if they come through, they can get valid, that he amends the charge and make sure that we don't harm the person. No points violations usually we give. Doesn't matter what your race is, doesn't matter what your economic is, but we try to help to see that can happen. I think that would be helpful throughout the courts. I also think that what Judge Parker said is exactly right. Having a system in place that you punish somebody that you know is going to use some sort of drug and not punish a person for another type of drug is because you call it crack or regular cocaine is the wrong way to go about that. And I think that was a system that was set up so the white collar people didn't have to serve sentences as the minorities did that couldn't afford that stuff. But again, I think that the stuff that we're talking about is changing. Everything takes time. But I think there are good thoughts in place and again, to me, misdemeanor court is a court where if there's more money or forgiveness of stuff to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, reinstatement fees, that you might allow more people to be able to drive validly, and you'd probably see less people in court.
And I think to piggyback off of what David said, both the prosecutor and the defense, everybody has this idea that attorneys are win at all costs. You know, they're full of crap. They're going to do what they need to do to win. Well, the prosecutor has Brady. They have an obligation to the court. The defense side has an obligation to the court. If I know I have a client who's going to get up there and lie through his or her teeth, I can't let that happen. I don't just get to put them up there and let them lie under oath. And so there are checks and balances in our justice system. So Dan's original question was, what about this perception that an officer can just get up on the stand and lie? And that's checked by the defense counsel, that's checked by the judge, that's checked by the prosecutor in that case, who all have their own accountability at stake before someone would go up there and do that. Now, you know, we've all seen the shows, the detective investigation show where an officer's investigating and then he separates the defendants, right? Hey, your buddy just ratted on you. Is that okay? Yeah, that's an investigation technique. But Brady material, and I agree, a Warren County Prosecutor's Office, the prosecutor's office that I practice in, take that very seriously. They're going to disclose that information. Nobody wants, our system is set up. I say this in almost every one of my jury selections or opening statements. Our system is set up to say that we'd rather see 10 guilty people go free before we see one innocent person put into jail. And so it's that kind of system that helps us look at what we're dealing with. Now what Judge Parker was saying is absolutely true. The crack cocaine numbers are staggering. The amount of African Americans in prison, the amount that are wrongfully convicted and then exonerated is much higher than that 13% number that we're talking about. But what I will say is one of the things we've mentioned is when we're talking about mandatory minimum sentences, we're not talking about somebody possessed some heroin. We're not talking about somebody possessed some cocaine. Some of the things that those are low-level felonies that we're talking about. You have to get into bulk amounts before you're talking about any sort of mandatory minimum sentences. So one of the things that the courts, and I think Warren County in particular, have done is treatment. There's treatment in lieu of conviction. There's treatment facilities that you can be sent to for first-time, even felony offenders, to deal with the addiction problem. So I think that piggies back into what Judge Parker has said about changing that perception and addressing some of the problems that did exist.
And Mr. DePorter touched on this during his first answer. I wanted to make a point to go back to it as well. There's also this belief that those with money will have a better outcome in the criminal justice system than those with lesser means. Does this, would you consider this to be lending to the bias that people feel? Is, in your opinion, is that the case?
I don't, again, if you have a lot of money, you can hire who you think is the best attorney in town. But the court-appointed counsel or the public defender's office, these people have been practicing law 20 and 30 years. I mean, they are well-seasoned. They have probably done more jury trials. I would venture to guess that I've done 20 to 25 jury trials, and I would say that I was in the top 10% in the area but you talk to the prosecutor's office or the public defender's office, and those guys shoot my numbers out of the water. I mean, so they're very well seasoned. The perception that you're going to buy a judge or buy a verdict or something, that was maybe 50 years ago that happened. That doesn't happen now. The thing is, you get a person that's better prepared, and be it the public defender, be it a private attorney, or be it some attorney that's got the biggest ad in the phone book. If they do their jobs, they're all capable of doing it. And I really believe that in this area, that is not the perception. I think that, and I think the judges could speak of that. I think that David Fornshell could speak of that when he prosecutes cases, that there are attorneys that come in that he may not know well, but when they come in, they have a reputation somewhere else, a private attorney, and then he can have the public defender that does just as good his job on those cases. So I don't see that as a bias.
Yeah, I've seen, I've seen people that are represented by extraordinarily experienced public defenders or have appointed counsel, and they're having some disagreement with their appointed counsel, and they say, they tell the judge, I'm going to fire him and get a real lawyer, and then they go out and hire somebody that has nowhere near, as much experience. So I was cautioned, this is your advice for the night. Go ask a lawyer who they would hire if they got in trouble, and that will, I guess, kind of maybe show you, who the good attorneys are and are not. That's not necessarily the ones that market the best, but there are good lawyers that are public defenders, and there are private counsel that I would never hire if I did get a speeding ticket in the Springboro Mayor's Court. There's no possible way I would hire a certain private counsel for that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's my experience in Warren County. But I think that you probably do get areas in our country where, and probably some of the large urban areas where the numbers, the mere volume of cases that you get are so high that, budgets being what they are, they don't have a ton of money to be able to pay either prosecutors or appointed counsel. And so you end up with, in some instances, sometimes young or inexperienced appointed counsel who have huge caseloads, and it may not be a situation where they're not qualified counsel if they had time to be able to deal with some of the clients that they have. So I'm sure in certain areas that's a real problem, and I think you're starting to see legislators and legislatures around the country that have focused a little bit more on funding for those types of issues. I don't see it as a big of an issue in our county, but I can certainly see how in some of your larger, more urban areas where the numbers are just higher, where it just can become overwhelming for defense counsel, and they don't have time to spend what you would, if you were the client, like for them to spend on those kind of cases. I would defer to the judge on his views on that.
Absolutely. Montgomery County, I can tell you right now, I just mentioned earlier about majority of the individuals that come before me are from underserved, undereducated, and under-resourced communities, which means you're going to have a higher number of individuals who need, public defenders to represent you. But you also have to remember, because the public defenders have a decent amount of caseloads, they're also the individuals that I, as judge, keep in contact with on a regular basis. I have much closer relationships with the public defenders because they have such robust caseloads in front of me. So there is a constant communication, constant motions being filed, constant communications with the prosecutors, with the public defenders, with myself, because of the proximity and the fact that we know that we want to make sure that these individuals are treated equally and fairly. So this notion that, it's a public defender, they don't care about my case, at least in my court and in Montgomery County, is absolutely not there. Now, Chicago, I don't know why I keep throwing Chicago out there, but it's just a big city. Los Angeles.
I'm from Illinois.
You're from Illinois? Okay.
Let's get off Chicago.
Okay. Big cities, there may be larger numbers, but here's the thing, and as Prosecutor Fornshell just mentioned, let's provide these entities with the resources that they need. It's that simple. We need more public defenders. We also need more public defenders that can be paid handsomely, or at least well enough to be able to help assist these individuals, so that way we can make sure that this continues. But there are plenty of times when I have a public defender who says, well, he wants to fire me because he or she wants to hire a real lawyer, and they go out and hire somebody, and I'm just like, well, you just threw away $2,000, the notion about public defenders and this stigma about public defenders not being real lawyers cannot be it's just completely off base and not true. Because again, I would say I have much closer relationships with my public defenders and with the prosecutors that are on my docket, all working collectively in order to make sure that we are right about what's going on in front of me.
And Judge Parker, they also require that you have years of experience
Absolutely.
at each level. You're not going to have a first-year attorney go out and handle a murder case in Montgomery County.
Absolutely.
You have to sit second chair. You have to do so many fourth and fifth degree felonies before you can move up the ladder in order to do that. And you have the backing of the public defender's office, which has resources for people to go ahead and do independent investigations, which is, again, I think David Fornshell is correct. When we talked about it, I think that on this panel, there are people in the public defender's office who say, I wish that person wasn't on this case. I wish they had this other guy on the case because he's not going to work as hard. And the reality is, for justice to work, everybody has to do their job. And we know as prosecutors and defense attorneys, you know that you can win a case against some person because they're not doing their job properly. And that is part of why the perception's there. Some people are there to earn the buck, some people are there to get whatever. But if everybody does their job, normally justice happens. It's the problem is, we on this panel know there are attorneys, and we know who the attorneys are, that don't do the work that needs to be done on any case, and they're in front of you. And sometimes you get to the level that there's mental health issues, there's substance abuse issues, and we have to police ourselves and tell them they are too old and they can no longer practice. And that, I think, is an important thing that we have to take on and look at.
Lieutenant, on that point, when I was younger, first starting, you would get some grumbling sometimes from a client who you were appointed to represent. And the grumble would be, you know these people, you're connected with this system. You know, it's human nature to value what you pay for. It's just human nature. So when you're court appointed, you're not paying for that. And so because you know these people, there's just this perception you're not going to work as hard or whatever, or you're connected. And then years later, I didn't do a lot of criminal defense work, but you get a little bit of gray hair around the ears, and somebody's in your office and they're saying, I want to hire you because you know these people and you're connected with this system, and that's who we need. Very same set of circumstances, but a different result, different feeling.
And a lot of people don't, Warren County is unique in that Warren County doesn't have a felony public defender's office. What it is you keep hearing the word appointed counsel thrown around. That's a list. That's a list of private attorneys who have signed up, who have been vetted, who said, tell me about your experience, how many jury trials have you had, what kind of jury trials have you had, you know, how many, those kinds of things. And we're gonna put you on a list. And obviously, you know, someone who's brand new, who's had one or two, isn't gonna get a felony murder capital trial, okay? And it goes down the line. So I think that's one of the things everybody thinks of the public defender, of somebody just walking in with 15 things and they're spilling everywhere and all of his case files and he's just running through them. Well, that's not the case. Especially here in Warren County, that's a private attorney assigned to your case. And in my experience, when I was on that docket before I became a prosecutor, you may have 5 to 7 max at the same time. So we're talking somebody assigned specifically to your case. Now, in our system, it would be naive to think that money doesn't matter. I have clients every day who I say, it's going to cost you this much to go to trial. Here's your risk. Let's even say it's a theft case, or here's what you may owe. And that has to come into people's minds. And so certainly that plays a role. I agree with Judge Kirby. It's human nature to think you get what you pay for, but some of the best attorneys I know are public defenders in Montgomery County, and as are the private attorneys who are still on that docket here in Warren County.
And I want to clarify too, for Montgomery County, we have our public defender's office, and then we also have the appointed list. So in case the public defender's office is just overwhelmed, then they can, these individuals will be appointed counsel as well. So Montgomery County, we do it right. We have the options there. We have the resources, and we make sure that we have public defenders to help those. If they're too overworked, we have the appointed counsel, and then you obviously have the right to hire or retain counsel as well.
Yeah, I would also say that on this, and I probably preach to everybody all the time, but to me, mental health is a huge thing about perception. And when there's no money to pay for, if you have money, you have health insurance, you can go and get help. If you have no money and no health insurance, and you get charged with an assault and you're in a municipal court, they're not going to spend the money to get you mental health. They just don't have the money. And so this person that has mental health issues continues to go throughout society, and they may escalate, they may never escalate, they may stay the same. But they are repeat offenders because they know nothing else. That's the mental health. And when we did away with these mental health facilities and we decided that that wasn't important, I think we made a mistake. I think that in society there are people that are in jail or in prison that because of mental health, and if we have a better system, we wouldn't have those people there. And again, I think that unfairly, I don't think it's purposely unfairly, it's minorities because they have less money that are in that system.
Great answer. I'm interested in hearing everyone's opinion on this, so we can start wherever you want to start. But in your opinion, what, if any, effect has the media had? What role have they played or have they not played in the belief that the criminal justice system is biased?
I'll start.
Okay, thank you.
I wish the newscast would start by saying today in America, 999,000 police officers did their job exactly perfectly today. But we have to talk about this one that didn't get it right. 2 million judges did their job today. This judge didn't quite get it right. So there's a lack of perspective. And so if you're just outside the system and you listen to the news, read the news, you just think everybody's doing a poor job. And there's no reminder of the vast, vast, vast majority of those that are doing an excellent job, because there's the focus on the one that particular day.
Well, the saying is, if it bleeds, it leads. And the first thing that starts on the news is, such and such was murdered here, or the shooting of this happened here, because that is where our culture is. That's what we want to listen to. Unfortunately, it's not about the many of our churches doing good work and schools doing good work, the kids. We don't start the news with those, because I guess nobody really wants to hear that. I've had the pleasure of working with so many officers who still protect me to this day and my family, have done amazing work. But unfortunately, 2020 was just an absolutely trying year. And media had a lot to do with it as well. But these were important issues that needed to take place during a pandemic, discussions that continually needed to take place. And it was unfortunate that we're talking about these issues now, that issues that have gone on for centuries. But the media has played a big part in that, a big role in that, but it's still up to everyone to be able to educate themselves as well and do some of the work as to what is actually taking place, which is why I always have an invitation to, every week in my docket, which is Thursday morning, and this is an open invitation to Springboro, Centerville, all the Montgomery County schools. My young man right here, who's here, the youngest one in the room, probably under 20 years old. I probably have a young person in my courtroom on a weekly basis to come watch my docket. And I do that for a reason, because I don't want the news or the media to tell everyone what's going on in my courtroom or in our court. I want them to see all the good work that is being done for themselves and within the courtroom. So I think it's encouraging to know that, remember, these courts are your tax dollars. You can go visit if you want. Especially the students. I encourage you to come see for yourself what's going on. When I was a prosecutor, our big brothers, big sisters, bring a child in so they could see what was going on at the prosecutor's office, so that when you do have these unfortunate events that took place, these terrible events that sometimes keep happening, you also can see the inner workings of what's really going on behind the scenes within the great work that prosecutors are doing, right along with police officers and the amazing work that they're doing, the judges that are changing lives around the world as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree that the media certainly highlights what grabs your attention. And so typically it's the most extreme example of anything that grabs your attention and that ends up on the media. I think I think it's kind of been a little bit of a pendulum in some regard, because I think a lot of these things that are now being captured on video, there are segments of our society who have seen that before and have said, you're shocked, that's happened before. There just was nobody there videoing it. Now there's somebody there that's videoing it. It doesn't mean that that is the majority or anywhere close to the majority. It's still the exception. But I think we've gone from a time period in which none of this happened, meaning when I say none of it happened on the media. None of it was shown to the media. Most of the members of the general public weren't aware that these types of incidents ever happened anywhere, to now we're in a situation where, because of social media, and it's not just traditional media, it's social media, people put it out, and sometimes you get to see the full clip, and sometimes you don't get to see how that interaction started. You get to see we had a situation, I remember, in Springboro a few years ago. It was a traffic stop, and all you got, the only thing that initially got streamed was the defendant who was fleeing from the police, the portion that he was live streaming on Facebook. Well, we had Cruiser Cam that showed the first like 3 or 4 minutes of what happened prior to that. And all of a sudden, the narrative that this gentleman was trying to put out in the media and on social media, I should say, was completely different from what actually had happened when you looked at the entire incident. So I don't want to blame the media entirely, because I think there has been good that has come of, anytime we're talking about accountability of anyone, whether it's judges, whether it's prosecutors, whether it's police officers, that's a good thing. But it's also a function of perspective as well, in that some of these incidents that you're seeing, do they happen? Yes. Do they happen throughout our country? Yes. Is that what is happening every day with every police officer that's out there? Absolutely not. It isn't. Fortunately, those incidents are not as frequent. When you think in our county, we probably have 300,000 citizen contacts with law enforcement every year. Literally 300,000 incidents where a law enforcement officer in our county has a contact with a citizen. How many of those do you actually hear about? Not many, and that's a good thing. But when something really bad happens, you're definitely going to hear about that. And so in some ways, I understand why people want to blame the media, but in other ways, some of this information, did need to get out.
It's very difficult as a trial attorney. It feels like the media never gets your case right. I think I speak for everyone up here when I say that, but I think I totally agree with what David's saying, and I agree with what Judge Parker's saying. On one hand, the media has an agenda. They're trying to get those likes, they're trying to sell, they're trying to get those ratings. On the other hand, some of these things that have been called to attention needed to be, absolutely. Now, what my problem, it seems like the media wants to lead you that you have to be polarized. If you're not for this or you're not against that, then you have to be pigeonholed. And that's what frustrates me about the media. Every police officer I've talked to about what happened in a particular police brutality, let's take George Floyd, for example. Every single officer I talk to, and I work with a lot of them in my different jurisdictions, they don't agree with what happened there. If you've watched that, you can't agree with what happened there. It's okay to support our law enforcement and people who put their lives on the line every day and not support what happened in a particular situation. And it seems like when the media tells us that we have to think this particular way and be 100%, that's just ignoring the fact that everything we see, this is real life. This is circumstantial. And so that's my issue, is that it's calling important issues to light. It also is trying to sell, but that serves a purpose. It seems like when the media tries to tell us we have to be a certain way, that's not what I want to hear. We can all be on the same page supporting our officers, while at the same time not supporting the minute percentage of circumstances where something isn't handled correctly.
Okay, and we're kind of circling back to where we started with this question, and we'll start with Mr. Fornshell. If you were king for a day, if you had the ability, what's one thing that you would change or fix in an effort to clear up the perception of a bias in the system?
I think understanding everybody's individual perspective is, the things that we're trying to do tonight. All of us have different perspectives based on our roles. The people that are in the audience tonight all have different perspectives based on your life experiences and what you've gone through. And I think it's important on both ends. If you're a law enforcement officer, you're a white law enforcement officer, and you've grown up in a white community, and all your friends have been white, and you don't, you might have gone to high school with somebody that was African American. You don't necessarily know, you don't know what it's like to be them. You don't know what it's like to go through what they go through on a daily basis. I had a conversation. We had somebody that worked in the county who was in our office after hours, and this was right after the whole George Floyd thing happened. And he was just in my office or walking by my office one night, and I just asked him, I'm like, what's your experience with law enforcement? What is your experience with law enforcement? And he was honest with me. He had largely positive experiences with law enforcement, but he also talked about times when he drove home from the county campus and he had an officer following him home for no reason other than he knew what the reason was, right? But he also, on the other hand, worked with officers and understood some of the situations where he would see uses of force incidents and things like that occurred, where he understood the type of split-second decisions that those officers have to make. And so I think, from my perspective, it really is learning other people's perspectives and talking about these issues and talking about our own experiences and what it's like to be in that other person's shoes, having empathy for what it's like to be in someone else's shoes and understand their perspectives and experiences. I think largely there is a lot of common ground. I think whether you're talking about police officers, I think the overwhelming majority of police officers, they don't want to be perceived as treating anyone differently than anyone else based on race, color, religion, anything. They want to be viewed as a good cop. And I think that members in the community want to be able to trust law enforcement. Everybody wants to live in a safe. There's not a single person I know that doesn't want to live in a safe community. Everybody wants to have a safe community and understands that law enforcement is necessary to have that happen. And I think that there are times when those two things collide, and being able to have these kind of conversations beforehand and build these kind of relationships beforehand, so that when something like a critical incident happens where you get perhaps an excessive use of force incident or something along those lines that happen, that there's that empathy and that trust that goes back and forth to where you can sit down. You're not always necessarily going to agree on whether a use of force is justified or not justified. There's times in an office like ours where we have prosecutors where we don't agree. Some people think that it was unjustified, and other people say, I think the person legitimately feared for their life. The officer legitimately feared for their life. So there's disagreements even internally. But I think if I was king for a day, it's continuing to have these conversations and to understand each other's perspectives, so that we can take those perspectives into consideration when we're making these kind of decisions as to what to do in our criminal justice system.
So I'm having a conversation with one of my colleagues, one of the other judges on the bench who lives in a community in Dayton. I don't want to put them out there, this community, but last year she mentioned that they had a community Facebook page. And on the Facebook page, there was these individuals who had Black Lives Matter signs, and then the folks who had the Blue Lives Matter signs were yelling at the folks with the Black Lives Matter sign, and then the folks with the Black Lives Matter signs are yelling at the folks in the neighborhood with the Blue Lives Matter sign. And they're going back and forth on social media, on Facebook, because that's how you handle things these days. And then there was an individual, a neighbor, that had a Black Lives Matter sign, a Blue Lives Matter sign, and a rainbow sign, supporting the LGBTQ community. And do you know that she got it from everybody? She got it from the Black Lives Matter people, the Blue Lives Matter folks, and everyone just came down on her because, as Mr. Babb said, you got to pick a side. She had a black son-in-law. Her daughter was gay. Her son was a police officer. What's she supposed to do? And I say that because, and I want to emphasize, it's okay to care about and mourn the shooting and the killing of unarmed black men. It's also very okay and should be supporting our men and women in blue. It's okay to care about the mass shootings and the killings and the senseless violence that take. We can care about all of these things. Robin DiAngelo wrote in her book, you know, she asked, what does it mean to have grown up in like a white lane? Gone to school, gone to church, you've worshiped, you've lived in a community, you've been in a neighborhood where the only meaningful contacts you've had are with people who look just like you, think just like you. And you've had no meaningful interaction with, let's say, a person of color, or input a gay person or a transgender person. And not only have you not had that meaningful interaction with a person of color or a person who is gay, but no one who mentored you, who loved you, who cared for you, even told you that there was any wrong in that. Like, not only did you not have that meaningful relationship with somebody that was different from you, but nobody who supported you, who mentored you, said that, it's all right. You'll be able to live through it. So, you know, if you look through your phones, you look through your contacts, you look through your Facebook page, look at your Twitter account, look through everything, and see, does everything line up? And is it the same? And you don't have any meaningful interactions with a person of color, with a person who's gay, a person who's transgendered, a person who's Indian? That's a problem. And I pray for your heart. And I hope that everyone, myself included, who still has demographics of individuals that I just don't understand. I really don't understand certain demographics and what they're struggling, what they're going through. But I want to make sure that I do understand it and that I do have relationships with that individual and hopefully be there, be a support system, or even direct them into the right scenario, right system.
Very well said. For me, it goes to what we learn on Sundays, and that's the golden rule. And that is that I'm going to treat you the way I want you to treat me. And so the promise would be I'm not going to prejudge you to have done something or not done something based on the color of your skin. So please don't look at me and think that that's what I'm doing. There's a lot of good people. I see so many good judges and magistrates and police officers who work really, really hard, and I just wish people could see their heart and see how much they really, really are looking to do the right thing. And it's not just cookie cutter justice. There's a lot of thought and intention to that, so that's where I go.
If I was king for the day, I would make sure that everybody listened to the other side, and they had to give a statement about the other side without degrading them, without putting them down. In today's world, the only way you're right is if you can make the other person look terrible and bring all the bad stuff up. And to me, that doesn't do anything. That if we're going to survive as a society, we have to be positive, we have to move forward, and there's got to be compromise. And the stuff that we're talking about, money back into the system, changing the system, those are all good things. And for the day, I'd like people to sit in the courtrooms like Judge Parker has, because if they see the system actually work, their eyes will be opened up to what the world really is like. You know, I'm going to be in front of Judge Kirby probably in the future, and this is not because of that, but he does a fantastic job of dealing with people and telling them how important they are and how important they are to the kids. And this is a bump in the road, and this is nothing negative about them. And when you have people on the bench like that, you know, people see that and think good in life rather than see the media, which, again, it sells and it has to sell. But if you believe what the media says all the time, or what one side always has to be right, Washington would never be there if one side always had to be right. We have to compromise. We have to move forward. The judicial system has to change. We have to put money into health, mental health, change situations. But yeah, for the king for the day, I guess the most important would be in the courtroom, watch how the system works, and for the vast majority of the people, they'll say, that's not a bad, I mean, you shoot somebody, you're going to go to prison. There's no question. You do something dumb like a bump in the road, you're probably going to get a scolding and move on, and that's the way it should be also. And it's not based upon the color of your skin, your race, your economic, it's going to be because of what you did.
I wouldn't be up here if I thought the system was broken. I believe in it. That's why I like doing what I do. Now, that doesn't mean we can't get better. And I think it starts with, we've talked about accountability on all sides tonight. We've talked about having these difficult discussions, like these gentlemen up here have been kind enough to share with us today. My personal thought is that our counties locally do a great job of treating each situation uniquely. We all have jobs. Judges have dockets to keep. I have many clients to take care of. I have dockets to keep as a prosecutor. But we have to recognize that for each person that comes in there, this is the most important thing in their life. And Judge Kirby says that, and I know Judge Parker practices that, and I know that as the prosecutor's office, David's office treats it that way, and when Kent and I are in our private practice or when you're in Springboro, we try and treat it that way. And I think treating everyone with that individuality, having these difficult discussions and hearing people out is what's going to change perceptions, just like it did that many years ago when the judge listened to my young African-American client to explain his circumstances. You know, he thought he was going to walk in there in a rural county like Warren County, and this white judge was going to throw the book at him. The judge heard him out and helped him get the treatment that he needed. And quite frankly, his life is completely turned around because of that. And treating people like those individuals and treating their circumstances as if you would your own, using that golden rule that Judge Kirby's talking about, I think is what's going to continue to help us progress.
Great answer from everyone. With that, I'd like to open it up for any questions. If anyone has anything they'd like to ask the panel, now would be the time. Yes, sir.
So, good evening. My name is Keith. I want to thank all of you for your time tonight. I don't really have a question, but I would like to make, I guess, a statement. I applaud what is happening here. Here, I live in Warren County, work in Montgomery County, so, I applaud what's happening here. Thank you. No worries. But the challenge that I want to toss to each of you is your connections with other prosecutors, other judges, who you interact with. Because as you all have kind of admitted to, and admit isn't the right word, that you have acknowledged in your statements that there is a disparity in our country between minorities and non-minorities. I guess that's we can't dispute that. Here is great, but when Mr. Webb, if you're at a large convention and you're interacting with your other attorneys and you hear an off-color joke or hear some comment that, some attorneys are treating other treating some of their non-white defense, I don't know, I forget the technical words, a certain way, say something about it. Affect them. Affect that 1, 2, 6 degrees of separations of each of you. Because right here sounds like it's perfect. I know it's not, but you 5 are doing what you can do to affect this area. What I would love to see is, again, as much as you can, we can only affect the span of our control, but as you are interacting with everyone else that are your peers and colleagues, engage them on that topic. I don't know how serious or how deep those conversations get with regards to what we are talking about tonight. And I appreciate us for having this. I wish there were more people here. I don't know what that says, that there are not more people here. I don't know what it says. I texted my wife to see if she could get a sense who's on Facebook and tuning in. She said it really didn't seem like a lot as well. So again, I don't know if that's apathy or not, but we still do have a problem. We still have a long way to go. I still feel like we black people are experiencing what I would kind of call, or me and my buddies say, PTSD from everything that has happened over the years. So without turning this into a long monologue, my challenge to each of you is to take this and continue to engage judges. When that young black man went into that white judge's court, and he said to him, just because you're black, that doesn't matter. I'm gonna teach and mentor you. I love that, again, my challenge is for you to take it forward. Run with it with those that you interact with, not even your colleagues, but you might even have neighbors that you know that are a little squishy. Don't let it go by anymore. Ask them, why is that so? Because trust me, I haven't been here very long, been about here 5 or 6 years, but my children have experienced some things that, I wish they hadn't from a racial perspective, albeit not from law enforcement, although my son has a heavy foot, he has been stopped, but the police officer treated him, I wasn't there. He explained it to me that the experience was what you expect. Hey, I got in trouble, here's your ticket, young man, go on, live your day. So please, take it forward. It sounds like we've got here under control. I know it is not perfect, but we got a big country. The numbers speak for themselves. We are a small percentage of the company's population, but we are almost a third of the incarceration. When you hear that, for me, it blows my mind. And my last thought here, any of you, if you have not seen, I think it's called The 13th, it's a Netflix special that really dives deep into this topic and talks about some of the disparities that are happening within our country. Please tune into that. I think it's about an hour and a half. I think it'll be worth your time if you are really serious about moving the needle on and not only race relations, but relationships between minorities and police officers and judges and the like. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Very good.
There was a panel before us of African-American officers, 2 of them from Springboro, 1 from Middletown. One was from Judge Parker, maybe you remember, in Montgomery, Miami Township, and Cincinnati. And it was really excellent, because if that link's still available, I think it was on YouTube and Facebook Live, it was amazing to hear their experience in balancing that PTSD that you just mentioned, sir, but being in the law enforcement field, how that interacts with their own community, with their own experiences, and changing that perception themselves within their own departments, probably. I highly recommend that, too. That was a plug for Randy and Antoine from Springboro in particular, but that's because I know them very well.
Well, I do thank you guys for coming, and I wish it was better attended. I'm hoping a lot of people will watch it afterwards and that we can continue to advertise these, because I think it's so important. People are shocked that a white Springboro is even having these. So kudos to our community for being willing to have the difficult conversations. I am curious. I kind of have met all of you in different ways, some of them less than fortunate with our children, but we're all doing great now. So Judge Parker, I believe, I'm curious with a stat that you gave previously about the third to what he said back there. I think it's interesting because a lot of you talked about checks and balances and the things that we're doing, but yet we have a third of those that are in prison. And I think, where are we missing? And I think clearly with the 5 of you here, we're doing really well, but we're still missing some things, because if all the checks and balances are in place, we wouldn't have that, because we're concerned. We have an African-American son. That's why we pulled him out of baseball practice tonight to attend, because we're concerned when we've explained, because we've You know, I have a friend that used to work at, when LexisNexis was here, from North College Hill, and he stopped driving through Springboro because he was continually getting pulled over. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen, but I've heard it too many times, and we've had those conversations. And when we talk about their perceptions of what happens when they go to court, I think, and it's wonderful to hear that your son had a great experience, but I think that some people have had less than wonderful experiences, and we've got to teach our young men, our young women, that when you get pulled over, this is what needs to happen. This is your responsibility, and then the police are going to treat you like this. But when it's concerning for us if it doesn't happen, and hopefully that won't be the case here. But I think to your case, when you're the young man that you represented, he had a concern for a reason. So I'm not looking for an answer. I just appreciate that we're having these difficult conversations because we're concerned. We have an African American in a very white community, and we want to do everything we can to continue the conversations so that it's not something that's just not discussed and it's just the way it has to be if you're going to be a person of color in a white community, because I think that that's the worst thing that could happen is to not talk about it.
I think all of us, you try to look, is there anything that you can do in your own processes, procedures, anything at all to try to instill confidence, even if you don't believe yourself that you're making decisions this way? What can you do? And I'll give you an example with our office. So we have a grand jury meeting each week where we decide our felony charges. And the grand jury worksheets, and basically unless I'm on vacation, then it comes to me, and I'm the one that ultimately pulls the trigger on which cases get charged as felonies, misdemeanors, no charges at all, however we decide to handle it. I get a one-page, because we handle about 1,200 felony cases a year, so I get a one-page write-up for most cases. Some it's a little bit longer, but it's a one-page write-up of all the essential facts of a particular case. What is not included on that is the race of the suspect. It's the name, it's the address, there might be a social on there. Now, as a practical matter, I'm in law enforcement. I can find out if I wanted to what information that I wanted to about anybody. But by and large, unless there's something factually in there that is relevant, maybe an identification or something along those lines, when you're just looking at what charging decisions to make, I have no idea what demographic that person falls into. Half the time, I shouldn't say half the time, some of the time, you can't even tell with the names whether it's a male or female, in all honesty. So it wasn't a huge change for our office. We did at the same time we changed a case management system and kind of changed our forms a little bit. Previously, all of that all the identifying information was on the top, and I don't think that was done for any reason other than historically they put every identifying information that you had on any suspect on the top of it. But with respect to our forms, at least for the past, I would say 3 to 4 years, none of that information. We have a name and you have an address and maybe an age and a social, but as far as demographic information, none of that's on there. And so, I don't know what has resulted in terms of the charges that come out of grand jury on that. We historically have not had the ability to track that. We have better data to be able to maybe start doing some of that kind of stuff. But at least we know on the charging decision side of it, by and large, our office is colorblind, if you will, in terms of those charging decisions.
I want to say that it's important to note, and Mr. Webb talked about it, that understanding that the individual that you're either representing or the individual that's coming before court might have a difficulty being comfortable. I mean, most people are going to be nervous. Nobody knows judges. They don't want to know us. They don't want a relationship because it's usually not a good situation if you have to appear in front of one. But what I will say is myself specifically, if anyone who knows me, I'm very, very, very big on mentorship and assisting at-risk, particularly at-risk youth. But also, I will say when it comes to young African-American males, I mean, I grew up in Butler County. I went to Lakota West High School in Butler County, which is like a sister to Warren County. Out of the demographics were not in my favor, obviously, at that time. It's much more diverse now. I mean, I was the only black person on the basketball team. I was the only black person on the basketball team at Lakota West and as a point guard. People don't understand that it is a different avenue when you are the only one that looks like you. And it's not saying you have to understand it, but getting to know what that person is going through. And I can only imagine what it's like to be a young African-American. I know what it's like. I'll just say, I know what it's like to grow up in Springboro. Head football coach, Coach Will Heights, my best friend, he was one of my coaches. He understood what it was like. And, you know, I think one thing I would just say is it's not easy when you're raising a young African-American male to be who he wants to be, and not to mention, not be who the media portrays us. I mean, we're typically good athletes, entertainers, all that stuff, which is one of the main reasons I wanted to run for this position, and I was successful in running for judge. Mind you, I was our first African-American male on the bench in Montgomery County Common Pleas Court in 2019. Now, not going into the details as to why that is or whatever, but the opportunities aren't necessarily always going to be there for the minority because you're the minority. I think this is just information that's just pretty easily understood. We live in a great country, democracy, majority pretty much has the upper hand, minority has to try to find their way. But these individuals on this panel are here because they are in counties and in areas and communities and neighborhoods that recognize that that is a problem. But I can tell you, I know there are other counties that don't necessarily do that. That's why it's so important that these gentlemen are here, and I applaud them for being here.
Sir, so what you just said, Judge Parker, it sparked another question. What's preventing other counties from adopting some of the philosophies that you gentlemen have? I mean, what is there anything that's transferable that can be, dare I say, taken on a road show? But I don't want to dive into my question. My question is, what do you think is stopping, any of you, stopping this type of dialogue or actions from happening in County X in Ohio? Because as you said, because I have other friends who live in other areas, this conversation is not happening. And that's a problem. Again, I think Mr. Reporter said it earlier. We're just tripping over ourselves. We're not getting there until we are candid about this. We want this to be just a self-looking ice cream cone for forever. And I want my grandchildren to have a different history, or not, they won't have a different history, but a different interaction with people than my dad and my grandfather and so on and so forth. So my short question is, what do you think is preventing other counties, people of industry from doing this?
It's not a fun conversation to have. I mean, I think that's, in all honesty, it's uncomfortable because it requires you to set aside your life experience and to understand somebody else's life experience. And that's not always easy to do. I mean, my life experiences is I work with police officers all the time, right? I go out on calls. I had a horrible situation a few years ago where there was a murder in the middle of the night. Police officers are out there and going in and taking children who are literally covered in blood because they were in the room when it happened, and I watched them go and buy diapers. And I mean, these are kind of my perspectives on police officers, right? Now I have to come and have a conversation with somebody who's going to talk to me about how not every police officer is like that, right? And it's uncomfortable because I don't, deep down, I don't want to hear that. I want to keep the perspective that I have of police officers always doing the right thing. right? Prosecutor's always doing the right thing. Judge is always doing the right thing. And engaging in these kind of conversations requires me to sit there and listen to somebody tell me I'm wrong, or at least I'm not 100% right. And it's not necessarily a fun conversation to have. It's just not. And so anytime an issue is uncomfortable, I think it tends to be avoided.
Yeah, the term that's come up in the past year a lot has been white privilege. And I tell you, that gets a lot of people really uncomfortable. But I want to make it clear, when that term is used, it does not mean that that individual has not faced any obstacles throughout their life. It just means that race was not one of them. And that,
I wish it was. I wish there was something to describe that didn't use the word privilege.
Exactly.
Because I think I agree with you. I think everybody gets aggravated when you hear the term privilege. At least speaking from a member of the white community, we think of rich people, right? Rich people are privileged, and I think if we could come up with a different term other than privilege, I think you get a lot more white people to agree with what you're saying.
well, maybe or maybe not. But my point, I agree with just like everything else, defund the police. I mean, we put these stickers and these labels on things. Like, nobody, why are we calling that? Because what's interesting about defund the police, we're really arguing about the same thing. We're arguing about what's best should our resources go. That is really what that means. But when you say defund the police, you mean you just want these guys out here handling these serious offenses with some sticks and a flashlight? Like, what are we doing? What we're trying to do is make sure that the resources are being allocated in ways that best keep the police safe and keep the community safe, but we put these labels and use things like white privilege. Well, nobody who was like Mr. Fornshell here, they don't want to hear that, but what they do, they're not saying that they've never had obstacles. Just talking about whether race was one of them. And as Mr. Fornshell said, race was not one of them. Let's discuss about the history that we've had and the complexities that we've had with race in this country. And then also, we can still continue to talk about the obstacles that a person who was white had because they were poor from Appalachia, because the difficulties in Appalachia are terrible as well. So these are all things that we have to come to a consensus that we want to all discuss.
Excuse me, let me say something.
Real fast, yeah, we're running. Absolutely.
Real short.
Yes, sir.
A couple of things. One, I want to thank all of you for being up here and for what you do. The thing that I wanted to bring up, we talk about perception. Perception is the key. And so we're talking about the law. We're talking about equal under the law for all people. All right? And to get where you're coming from, you have to have that difficult conversation. Now, I'm not going to go into a whole lot of stories here, but I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. But I think one of the things that kind of got me just in the news, and I don't follow the news much anymore because everything's bad on there, but they had this story about Gabby out in Utah. Missing, found her, can't find laundry. But there's two other African Americans been missing for quite a while, and their pictures never showed on the news. So how do you change that perspective and that perception from other people, especially people of minorities, to say, well, they're not even worried about us. They don't even think about us. Now, I'm a 42-year veteran of Springboro, Ohio. I was one of the first African Americans that lived here and lived here for 20-something years, and being the only one. That being said, this community is awesome. I work as a veteran service commissioner, so I'm known around here, but I love this place. And my son grew up here. So I've been in the shoes that you've been. A lot of other people have not stepped in my shoes, and I've got some stories that go way back, and I'm not going to do that. But today, having been on the panel that you're on, it was important for us to have this conversation. And I think as long as we continue to have this conversation and it gets broadcast, then maybe some of the other communities around us will see what we're doing and will plant that seed so that it starts to perpetuate and it just continues on and it does what we want it to do. Thank you.
With that, we're short on our time. If you can hold it, the panel will stick around a little bit for any other questions that come up after this. We are over.
I'll give you 30 seconds. one of the most valuable parts of you gentlemen being here is taking the time after the conversation, after your Q&A on the stage, to take comments from the people out here. Thank you very much for having the courage to do that and the openness to do that. That builds trust like nothing else, because it goes from a presentation where I assume everybody had the questions ahead of time to a real interaction with the community. I just thank you guys so much for doing that, and I really encourage you to keep the momentum going. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you. If we could get a round of applause for our panel. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.